money or getting a certain job or being able to have a certain lifestyle. So basically very short-term goals that have, for Weber, have no real kind of moral connotation or moral meaning to them. But then for Weber there are these other types of action, of rational action. One was called value rationality. For Weber, this specifically applied in the case of religious people and religious groups where they had a sense of a value of what the long-term course of their life should be like, and this value was derived from their religious sensibilities, and everything they did along the way to that goal was oriented towards that goal. So it wasn't in the moment like, oh, how am I going to make money and that sort of thing, but it was kind of a long-term pattern of people's life. I put this up here as background because I'm going to come back to it. Another important part of background on Weber is this famous switchman metaphor. What this means is that Weber, like most sociologists, is saying, for the most part, we can understand why people act by looking at things like power, status, money, that sort of stuff, right? So Weber says if we look at how somebody's acting and they're moving along as this arrow, or we'll talk about a society's moving along as this arrow, we act in a certain way according to status, power, and all that sort of stuff. But then Weber says there's always the possibility that basically a new value, a new ideal will come along. And whereas we, as sociologists, we would predict that this society or this individual or this group would kind of keep on continuing on its way, Weber says, no, there's always a possibility that this new idea will come along that will go and it'll send the group in a totally new direction. This is exactly what Weber is arguing about the Protestant ethic. What Weber is saying is that there's this long history of kind of religious history and religious thought in which basically amassing wealth and doing things to be wealthy was completely immoral. It was called the sin of usury, U-S-U-R-Y. And there was a very particular conception of call, which Weber talks about. And there was the Catholic conception of call, where basically you're kind of in this life, the sacraments of the church kind of give you this security blanket, so you don't have to worry about if you're saved, and because of that, you don't have to think of your life at all. Everything is kind of ordered. The way it is the way it is. No lifestyle or no call has to be lived out differently. What Weber is saying is that this pattern, which we might have expected to go on and on forever, and indeed, in Weber's eyes, did continue on with some groups into modernity, for example, in his example, like some Catholics into modernity, but there was this huge idea explosion right here that's tied to, and I don't know if you can see this down here, to the Protestant Reformation. It's tied to Luther and Calvin. And what Weber is saying is, like, right at this point, Luther and then Calvin developed these new intricate understandings of call and of God that completely shift the way that normal activity had been heading. And so you have these groups, especially Calvinists and Protestants, shooting out in a different direction, which Weber said eventually leads to capitalism. Okay, I've written a lot on this board, so let me erase it really quick and then we'll kind of recap this in a little bit clearer way. So that's laying the groundwork to say Weber has these ways of saying that there's different rationalities in the world. For the most part, in the modern world, people kind of survive according to this utilitarian rationality. But especially at an earlier time, and especially with religious groups, there's this more value rationality, a kind of goal that a group or individuals headed towards. And he's saying what's interesting is if you pop a new value or a new idea in the midst of the life of a society, it has the possibility, this new belief, this new idea, this new value, to shift the way that society goes about doing its thing. Now, one other piece of background to this is Weber had a somewhat, where did I put it? A related argument in which he said that there were basically 4 ways that religious groups could orient themselves to the world. Let me write this out. I'm going to draw the classic sociologist 2x2 table. So these 4 ways come from this table. Basically what Weber said was religious groups orient their lifestyle either to this world or to the other world, a world beyond. And religious groups do certain types of actions or behavior when they are in this world. The arena of work that they do, while alive, is either an ascetic type of work, which is very spend your day and your time kind of on doing those classic human things of working and making sure the field's ready to go, possibly raising children, finishing your studies, balancing your checkbook, all that sort of stuff. Or religious groups, their activity is defined by mysticism, which is basically kind of the life, if you will, of removal and kind of distanced spirituality. And so let me give you a couple examples. What he says in this square right here, we could think of medieval Catholic monks, okay? Their orientation was otherworldly, right? So they were celibate, they didn't have wives, they lived in a group of which they obeyed the superior general of the monastery. But the work they did was very kind of everyday sort of work. Monks are famous for making cheese, making beer, making wine. There's still monasteries in the US that do all these things to this day. So Weber says, aha, that's really interesting. This group, they're oriented towards the other world, right? But their lifestyle in the here and now is very oriented towards the daily day in and day out activities. Now to contrast that, we might look, for example, at some classic Buddhist monasteries. So think of like a monastery high up in the mountains, in which a lot more of the activity is really oriented towards a meditation of the beyond. So kind of overcoming the substance of this life. And yes, they have to do daily activities, but those daily activities aren't what prepare them for the next life. Instead, it's kind of the trying to remove their self and to kind of orient towards this other kind of spiritual presence. And then over here, a couple of other examples. Well, first off, we'll put the Calvinist here, because that's what the article is about you read for today. And then down here, I don't know, I'm going to guess and put the Dalai Lama. So in this category, we have this worldly, so where the salvation, if you will, in some way for the groups in this column is worked out right here on earth, okay? All the attention is focused on this moment, this life. And in the mystic tradition, we might think of the Dalai Lama, who he's not cloistered, he's not in a monastery. He's definitely this worldly and being involved in kind of politics and culture and that sort of thing. But his orientation in terms of spirituality still tends to be very much the meditation sort of approach to things. And then finally for Weber, the whole argument of this book is that this group of people that he calls Calvinists basically invent this one particular way of being religious, which is we're going to be in this world and we're going to be ascetic, which means we're not oriented, yes, we're worried about the life hereafter, but unlike the monks, we're not removing ourselves from the world. We're staying in the world. We're working as plumbers and doctors and school teachers. We're having children. We're not doing anything different. We don't have any sort of removal from society like this column does. And then the other important thing is we're not going to be like this column down here where we try and meditate and kind of think through and remove ourselves and that sort of thing. No. Instead, we are actually going to be like wrapped up in all the work and strife of this world as the way to work out our salvation. Okay? So this is all tons of background. So those are two key axes of religious behavior for Weber. And what he's basically saying is, as I drop this, is he's looking at the curious fact to say, how is it that capitalism came to be? It seems to be this compilation of behaviors, and now